The final decades of the 19th century marked a dramatic turning point in the history of the United States, a moment when the pace of change exceeded anything the world had ever witnessed. Steam power, telegraphs, and early mechanization, hallmarks of the first industrial revolution, had already transformed parts of Europe and the northeastern United States. But what was coming next would dwarf those earlier changes. It would reshape every American home, factory, farm, and city. It would redefine wealth, power, transportation, communication, and daily life itself. This new transformation would later be known as the Second Industrial Revolution, a sweeping era of technological acceleration that stretched roughly from the 1870s to the early 20th century, and it would catapult the United States into a modern industrial superpower. At the heart of this revolution was a fusion of science, industry, and capital unlike anything seen before. Innovations moved from theoretical ideas to mass production at breathtaking speed. Electricity replaced steam, steel replaced iron, and chemistry began to unlock new materials and products. Corporations expanded, railroads connected the continent, cities exploded in size, and millions of immigrants poured into the country seeking opportunity. The United States, once a largely rural nation, rapidly became one of the world's most urban and technologically advanced societies. But to understand how this transformation happened, we must go back to the period immediately after the Civil War, a time when the country was bruised, deeply divided, and struggling to rebuild. Yet even amid this instability, certain forces were gathering strength: technological innovation, entrepreneurial ambition, and an abundance of natural resources. As the nation healed, these forces ignited an economic expansion that would define an era. One of the most critical foundations of this revolution was the rapid expansion of the railroad network. Before the Civil War, railroads served as regional lifelines, but afterward, they grew into a vast national system. The completion of the first transcontinental railroad in 1869 symbolized a new era of connectivity. Goods, people, information, and capital began moving across the continent at speeds never imagined before. Farmers in the Midwest could ship wheat to New York. Ranchers in Texas could send cattle to Chicago, meatpacking plants, and coal, iron, and timber could be extracted from remote regions and moved to rapidly expanding industrial cities. These railroads were more than transportation systems. They were arteries of economic growth. They required steel, coal, lumber, locomotives, and labor. Large corporations, such as the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Union Pacific, grew into powerful entities, influencing politics, finance, and trade. The sheer scale of these companies introduced a new feature of American economic life: the modern corporation, with stockholders, managers, complex accounting, and national operations. This new corporate model would later shape industries far beyond railroads. The expansion of railroads also stimulated one of the most transformative industries of this era: steel. Although iron had been important for decades, it was steel, stronger, more durable, and capable of supporting far heavier loads, that enabled modern skyscrapers, bridges, ships, and machinery. Before the Second Industrial Revolution, steel was expensive and limited in quantity. But the introduction of new methods, such as the Bessemer process, revolutionized production. Suddenly, steel could be produced quickly, cheaply, and in immense quantities. No figure symbolizes this revolution better than Andrew Carnegie. A Scottish immigrant who began his American life as a poor factory worker, Carnegie recognized the potential of steel before most others did. Through aggressive expansion, technological innovation, and relentless cost-cutting, he built the largest steel company in the world. His factories in Pittsburgh became the beating heart of American industrial might, churning out rails, beams, and plates that reshaped the American landscape. Carnegie A.S. rise also reflected another key feature of the Second Industrial Revolution: the emergence of extraordinarily wealthy industrialists, often called captains of industry or robber barons, depending on one's perspective. These men, Carnegie in steel, Rockefeller in oil, Vanderbilt in railroads, Morgan in finance, wielded unprecedented economic power. Their strategies reshaped markets, crushed competitors, and influenced government policy. They were admired for their innovation and condemned for their monopolistic tactics. Yet their impact on America's industrial development was undeniable. While steel transformed infrastructure, another innovation electrified daily life: the harnessing of electricity as a practical and commercial source of power. Before electricity, factories relied on steam engines, households used oil lamps, and cities were plunged into darkness after sunset. But with the breakthroughs of inventors like Thomas Edison, electricity became the lifeblood of modern life. Edison's invention of the incandescent light bulb in 1879 and his efforts to build centralized power stations marked the beginning of a new era. Factories no longer depended on proximity to steam or water power. They could operate at all hours. Cities lit up with electric lamps, making nighttime safer, more productive, and more vibrant. Homes gradually adopted electric appliances, and communication technologies, such as the telephone, spread rapidly. Electricity also fueled further industrial innovation. Electric motors replaced steam engines in factories, increasing efficiency and reducing costs. Electric streetcars transformed urban transportation, enabling cities to grow outward into suburbs. And electric telegraphs and telephones revolutionized communication, allowing businesses to coordinate operations across vast distances with speed and accuracy. While electricity reshaped urban America, another set of technologies revolutionized agriculture and manufacturing. The Second Industrial Revolution was characterized by mass production, mechanization, and efficiency. Innovations such as automatic looms, sewing machines, typewriters, and agricultural harvesters transformed workplaces. Factories introduced assembly lines and scientific management practices that maximized productivity. Though Henry Ford's automobile assembly line would become famous in the early 1900s, the core concept, breaking down production into specialized tasks, emerged in this era and laid the groundwork for 20th century manufacturing. But this economic boom also came at enormous human cost. The rapid industrialization of America created harsh working conditions for millions of laborers. Factory workers toiled long hours in dangerous environments for low wages. Child labor was common, and workplace accidents were frequent. As cities grew rapidly, overcrowded tenements and unsanitary living conditions became widespread. Immigrants, who supplied much of the industrial workforce, often faced exploitation, discrimination, and poverty. These conditions sparked a wave of labor organizing and social reform movements. Workers demanded shorter hours, better pay, and safer workplaces. Major strikes, such as the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 and the Haymarket Affair of 1886, highlighted the tensions between labor and capital. Though often met with violent repression, these movements laid the foundation for future labor protections and the rise of labor unions. Another force shaping the Second Industrial Revolution was the influx of immigrants. Between 1870 and 1914, more than 20 million immigrants arrived in the United States, primarily from Europe, but also from Asia and other regions. They came seeking opportunity, escaping poverty, war, and persecution. These immigrants filled factories, built railroads, opened shops, and contributed to every sector of the expanding economy. Their presence diversified American society and enriched its culture, but it also fueled social tensions and political debates about citizenship, assimilation, and economic competition. Technological innovation, entrepreneurship, immigration, and natural resources all converged to fuel America's rapid growth. The United States possessed abundant coal, iron ore, timber, oil, and fertile land. Entrepreneurs recognized the potential of these resources and built vast industries around them. The discovery of major oil fields in Pennsylvania and other states launched a new era of energy production and industrial fuel. John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company would eventually dominate the oil industry through aggressive expansion, vertical integration, and cost control, becoming one of the first true global monopolies. By the end of the 1880s, the United States had transformed into a modern industrial economy. Cities like New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh, and Detroit grew into major industrial centers. Skyscrapers rose, streetcar lines expanded, and public services such as water, sewage, and public transportation struggled to keep pace with urban growth. Banks, insurance companies, and investment firms expanded to support large corporations and national markets. The stock market became a central component of American economic life. Yet beneath the surface of progress, deep inequalities persisted. Wealth became highly concentrated among industrialists and financiers. Workers faced instability, exploitation, and uncertainty. Farmers struggled with falling prices and high railroad freight rates. Political corruption was widespread, especially in rapidly growing cities where machine politics controlled local governments. These tensions would eventually spark reform movements such as the Progressive Era, as Americans sought to regulate corporations, improve working conditions, and reduce political corruption. The Second Industrial Revolution was more than an economic transformation. It was a social, cultural, and technological upheaval. It redefined what it meant to be American. It changed where people lived, how they worked, what they consumed, and how they saw the world. It turned the United States into a global industrial power capable of influencing world events. And it set the stage for the modern American economy, connected, mechanized, electrified, and driven by continuous innovation. This first part captures the origins and foundations of the Second Industrial Revolution, highlighting the forces, railroads, steel, electricity, corporate expansion, immigration, and urbanization, that ignited the extraordinary transformation of America. In the next part, the narrative continues deeper into the explosion of new technologies, the rise of monopolies, the shifting social fabric, and the profound ways American life was reshaped as the revolution intensified. The momentum that began in the late 19th century accelerated with astonishing force as America stepped confidently into the age of big business. The country's industrial engine roared louder, powered by new technologies, deeper pockets of capital, and a cultural belief that growth was both inevitable and necessary. Factories multiplied, rail lines expanded across thousands of miles, and corporations transformed from small family operations into massive structures capable of influencing national policy, shaping labor markets, and determining the direction of entire industries. In this era, scale became a defining principle, and those who could produce the most, fastest, and cheapest would dominate the American landscape. Andrew Carnegie had already shown what was possible when ambition met industrial innovation. His steel empire demonstrated that vertical integration, controlling every step from raw materials to final product, was the new formula for success. The method spread quickly across industries. By controlling not only the manufacturing process, but also transportation, distribution, and even marketing, a business could eliminate middlemen, cut costs, and overpower any rival still operating on traditional, smaller scales. Competitors struggled to keep up as corporations grew into enormous entities capable of producing goods in quantities the world had never seen. At the same time, John D. Rockefeller's empire became the symbol of corporate modernity. Standard Oil refined kerosene and later gasoline more cheaply and more efficiently than anyone else. But its true innovation was organizational. It pioneered new corporate structures, trusts, and holding companies that allowed Rockefeller to consolidate dozens of refineries under one unified system. This made his empire nearly impossible to challenge. His methods were criticized by many, celebrated by others, but undeniably effective. Standard Oil became a blueprint for business leaders seeking national, even global dominance. As steel and oil shaped the backbone of American infrastructure, railroads functioned as the arteries. The massive expansion of national rail networks allowed goods to travel farther and faster, connecting farmers in Iowa with factories in Pittsburgh and linking mines in Wyoming with ports in New York. The railroad corporations became some of the largest employers in the nation, hiring thousands of workers and influencing the growth of countless towns. They standardized time zones, reorganized management systems, and defined new ways of coordinating logistics across vast distances. America's physical and economic geography was being rewritten mile by mile. Banks and financial institutions emerged as crucial partners in this new world, providing the capital needed to scale operations. J.P. Morgan became the central figure in American finance, orchestrating mergers, stabilizing failing corporations, and consolidating industries. Through his influence, the modern corporate model gained structure. The capital raised through banks and investors allowed companies to expand at a speed that small independent businesses could never match. With money flowing more freely, inventors gained support, entrepreneurs took greater risks, and industrial output soared to unprecedented heights. But the rise of big business also reshaped everyday life in ways that were less visible but equally profound. The new factories demanded large, consistent workforces. As a result, immigration surged. Millions of people from Europe arrived in search of opportunity, filling positions in steel mills, textile factories, coal mines, and assembly lines. Their labor powered America's industrial boom, but their presence also transformed cities. Neighborhoods became densely populated, languages mixed on crowded streets, and cultural diversity became an integral part of the urban experience. Cities like Chicago, Detroit, and New York grew at explosive rates, becoming industrial hubs that embodied both the promise and the challenges of modern America. Inside these sprawling factories, work was demanding and often dangerous. Hours were long, wages low, and conditions harsh. Machines became faster and louder, and the expectations placed upon workers grew heavier as production quotas increased. The gap between wealthy industrialists and laborers widened dramatically. While industrial magnates accumulated vast fortunes, workers struggled with the rising cost of living and uncertain job security. These frustrations would soon fuel powerful labor movements. But for now, the machine of industrial America moved without pause, driven by the relentless pursuit of productivity. Technological innovation played a central role in enabling this transformation. New processes made steel stronger and cheaper, machinery more efficient, and production more consistent. Assembly line principles began to take shape even before Henry Ford applied them fully decades later. Factories reorganized themselves around efficiency, optimizing the placement of machines, materials, and workers. Speed became a critical metric. The faster a factory could turn raw material into a finished product, the more competitive it became. These innovations laid the foundation for the global dominance of American manufacturing in the 20th century. Electricity began entering factories, homes, and city streets. This shift changed more than work environments. It changed daily life. Electric lighting allowed factories to operate longer hours, freeing production from the limitations of daylight. Households began adopting electric appliances that reduced domestic labor and altered the rhythm of family life. Streetlights illuminated neighborhoods, making urban spaces feel safer and more connected. Electricity became a symbol of progress, signaling that the American experience was transitioning rapidly into a new era powered by innovation. Communication transformed as well. The telegraph, and later the telephone, connected businesses in real time, allowing decisions to be made faster and operations to run more efficiently. companies could coordinate shipments, track inventory, and negotiate deals across vast distances. This new speed of communication reduced uncertainty and enabled corporations to grow larger without losing control. American society began to feel smaller, more interconnected, and more tightly organized through these technological threads. Mass production techniques, growing consumer markets, and expanding distribution networks created a new economic ecosystem. Companies started advertising aggressively, using newspapers, posters, and eventually magazines to promote their goods. The concept of national brands emerged as corporations sought to stoke demand beyond regional boundaries. Consumers, once limited to local craftspeople and nearby stores, now had access to products made hundreds or thousands of miles away. The modern American consumer culture was taking root, but with expansion came conflict. Smaller businesses feared being crushed by the growing monopolies. Critics accused industrial giants of manipulating markets, exploiting workers, and undermining democracy. Journalists and reformers began investigating corporate abuses, exposing unsafe working conditions, child labor practices, and corrupt dealings between business leaders and politicians. These exposures fueled public demand for change, setting the stage for political reforms that would emerge in the following decades. Despite the controversies, the country moved forward with unwavering belief in industrial progress. The scale, scope, and ambition of American enterprises reshaped the global economy. Goods produced in American factories reached markets on every continent. American steel built bridges, railways, and skyscrapers worldwide. American coal fired engines around the globe. American machinery supplied farms, mines, and industries in dozens of countries. The United States transitioned from a young nation to a global industrial heavyweight in less than a generation. The rise of corporate America also redefined wealth. Industrialists accumulated fortunes unimaginable in earlier eras. Their houses became architectural feats filled with art and luxury. Many saw themselves not just as business leaders, but as visionaries shaping the future. They funded libraries, universities, museums, and foundations, believing their wealth carried a responsibility, however interpreted, to contribute to society. This era of philanthropy left a lasting cultural legacy that continues through modern institutions. Yet beneath the layers of innovation, expansion, and prosperity, deeper tensions remained. Unequal distribution of wealth stirred unrest. Rapid urbanization strained public infrastructure. Immigrant communities struggled for acceptance and stability. Workers endured conditions that tested human endurance. And the power of massive corporations raised questions about fairness, competition, and political influence. The Second Industrial Revolution was not only an age of extraordinary advancement, it was an era of unresolved contradictions that would soon erupt into conflict. America stood at a crossroads. Its factories were unmatched, its innovations world-leading, and its corporate structures revolutionary. But the same forces that fueled progress also exposed cracks in the nation's social and economic foundations. The next stages of the American industrial story would reveal whether the country could adapt to these tensions, or whether the weight of its own rapid growth would threaten its stability. Industrial America entered the late 19th century with a momentum unlike anything the world had yet witnessed. What had begun as a series of scattered technological advances now transformed into a coordinated national surge, powered by infrastructure, capital, and the accelerating appetite of a society learning to live at industrial speed. The nation's factories roared day and night, production lines expanded, and thousands of workers poured into rapidly growing industrial hubs. The factory replaced the farm as the defining engine of the American way of life, and every cityscape began to reflect the new industrial reality. Smoke, steel, electricity, and human ambition blended into the unmistakable rhythm of a nation remaking itself from the inside out. As production intensified, new corporate titans rose to command entire sectors of the economy. The emergence of trusts, vast combinations of companies controlled by a single board, redefined the relationship between industry and power. These corporate empires operated at scales once unimaginable, consolidating mines, railroads, refineries, steel plants, and communication networks under centralized command. The scale of production soared, efficiency multiplied, and markets expanded to levels that dwarfed earlier decades. For many Americans, these developments seemed to offer limitless opportunity. For others, the sheer concentration of power posed a challenge to democratic ideals, raising questions about who truly governed the nation, elected officials, or the industrialists shaping the country's economy. Workers felt these shifts most acutely. As corporations grew, the factory floor became a world governed by rules, strict schedules, and relentless demand for output. The rise of scientific management, systems designed to maximize efficiency by studying every movement of every worker, reduced labor to measurable units of productivity. This approach increased profits, but it also created new tensions between labor and capital. The long hours, low wages, and hazardous conditions sparked widespread discontent. Even as millions of immigrants arrived seeking better lives, they entered a workforce already stretched thin by industrial pressure. Cities became crowded labor centers where ambition mixed with hardship, and where the dream of upward mobility hinged on surviving and succeeding in an environment that valued production above all else. At the same time, the nation witnessed a technological acceleration that connected people more closely than ever before. The telephone and telegraph created new forms of communication, shrinking distances that had once isolated regions. With a few lines of wire, information could move instantly, and corporations could coordinate operations across thousands of miles. The speed of communication redefined competition itself. Decisions once made over days or weeks now happened in minutes, giving well-organized industrial firms an unprecedented advantage over slower, more traditional businesses. For many Americans, the sense of living in an era of nonstop change became an everyday reality. The expansion of electricity became one of the most transformative forces of this era. Electric power spread from cities to factories, illuminating vast workspaces and enabling production around the clock. It powered streetcars, drawing workers and shoppers across urban centers with a speed that further reshaped the rhythms of daily life. Electric signs glowed above busy streets, advertising the modernity that businesses sought to project. For the first time, the night no longer dictated rest. The boundaries between day and night blurred, and society learned to operate on a schedule defined not by the sun, but by industrial demand. Electricity also accelerated consumer culture. Factories powered by electric machinery produced goods faster and at lower cost, while electric lighting allowed stores to remain open longer, attracting crowds eager to explore new products. Sears, Roebuck and Company expanded its catalog business with astonishing speed, bringing manufactured goods to families across the country. Many Americans who had once made their own tools, clothing, or household items now purchased mass-produced products shipped from distant factories. Choice increased, prices fell, and consumption began to shape the national identity. The United States was becoming not just an industrial nation, but a consumer-driven one. Behind the growing factory output lay the massive expansion of America's transportation networks. Railroads stitched the country together, but now they became more than just carriers of goods. They became arteries of national commerce. Standardized track gauges, stronger steel rails, faster locomotives, and more complex scheduling systems transformed the railroads into highly efficient integrated networks. Major railroad companies developed advanced organizational structures, creating layers of managers, clerks, dispatchers, and engineers who coordinated movement with near military precision. This administrative complexity became a model for other large corporations, influencing the evolution of modern corporate management. Railroads also opened vast new markets. Goods could travel from Chicago to New York, from St. Louis to San Francisco, from Pittsburgh to Texas, moving across distances that once made commerce difficult or impossible. Farmers, miners, and manufacturers found new customers nationwide, and entire regions became economically interconnected. Towns grew around depots, and remote communities suddenly gained access to national trade. Yet railroads also wielded enormous power over pricing, freight classifications, and access to markets, fueling anger among small farmers who felt exploited by rate systems that favored large corporations. These tensions helped spark political movements demanding reform, further illustrating how deeply the Industrial Revolution reshaped American social and political life. Urban growth became one of the most visible consequences of the era. Cities swelled with migrants from rural areas and immigrants from abroad, transforming urban centers into bustling, densely packed landscapes. Skyscrapers rose into the skyline, built with steel frames that allowed heights once impossible with brick construction. Electric elevators made these tall buildings practical, allowing businesses to expand vertically rather than horizontally. Streetcars, subways, and electric trains connected neighborhoods, enabling cities to spread outward while maintaining dense urban cores. The modern American city, full of light, noise, movement, and opportunity, took shape during these decades, but growing cities also faced severe challenges. Overcrowded tenements housed families in cramped, unsanitary conditions. Pollution from factories darkened the air, and waste accumulated faster than infrastructure could handle. Disease spread easily, and poverty became a defining feature of urban life for millions. Reformers documented these conditions and pushed for changes, leading to early public health initiatives, housing reforms, and new approaches to social welfare. Many Americans believed that industrial progress needed to be accompanied by moral and civic responsibility, and they pushed for reforms that would shape the future of urban governance. Even as cities struggled with overcrowding and inequality, they became centers of innovation. Engineers, inventors, and entrepreneurs gathered in urban workshops, laboratories, and offices, creating an environment where ideas spread rapidly. Innovation attracted investment, and investment fueled more innovation. This cycle produced breakthroughs that reshaped industries and opened entirely new fields. The typewriter revolutionized office work, giving rise to a new class of clerical workers. The cash register transformed retail operations. The internal combustion engine began to attract attention, setting the stage for future developments that would redefine transportation. Innovation became not just a feature of the Industrial Revolution, it became its driving ethos. One of the most influential developments of this era was the rise of mass production. Factories adopted assembly line principles that allowed products to be manufactured with remarkable speed and uniformity. Standardized parts ensured consistency, enabling workers to perform specialized tasks repeatedly rather than crafting entire items from scratch. This method increased output dramatically and lowered costs, making manufactured goods accessible to millions. Although Henry Ford would later refine these principles in automobile production, their origins lay in the broader industrial transformation of the late 19th century. Mass production changed the relationship between workers and machines, prioritizing efficiency over craftsmanship and redefining the meaning of labor in a modern economy. The era also saw major advances in the extraction and processing of natural resources. Steel production reached new heights with the widespread adoption of the Bessemer process, while coal mining expanded to fuel the furnaces, locomotives, and power plants, driving industrial growth. The oil industry boomed as refineries produced kerosene, lubricants, and eventually gasoline for a growing list of applications. Timber, copper, and other resources were harvested at unprecedented rates, supporting the construction, electrical, and manufacturing sectors. The scale of extraction transformed landscapes globally, bringing both prosperity and environmental consequences that would become apparent in later generations. Scientific research increasingly merged with industry. Large corporations funded laboratories where chemists, physicists, and engineers developed new products, improved production methods, and solved technical challenges. The partnership between science and industry strengthened the American economy and propelled the United States to the forefront of global technological leadership. Universities expanded their engineering and science programs, training new generations of professionals who would power the nation's industrial ascent. Knowledge became a form of capital, and innovation became the currency of American progress. Amid these transformations, the United States began expanding its influence abroad. Industrial capacity required new markets for goods and new sources of resources, and American business leaders looked overseas to secure their economic interests. Trade networks expanded across the Pacific and into Latin America. Companies sought opportunities in mining, agriculture, transportation, and manufacturing beyond U.S. borders. The nation's newfound industrial power positioned it as a rising global force, laying the groundwork for future international involvement. Yet alongside the triumphs of industrialization came profound social challenges. The gap between the wealthy and the working class widened dramatically. Industrial barons accumulated vast fortunes, while millions of workers lived on the edge of poverty. The tension between these groups intensified as strikes, protests, and confrontations erupted across the country. Workers demanded better wages, safer conditions, and reduced hours. Business owners resisted, fearing disruptions to production and profits. This struggle defined much of the social climate of the era and played a crucial role in shaping labor rights that would gradually emerge in the decades to come. Women also entered the industrial workforce in greater numbers, taking positions in factories, offices, and retail establishments. Many found new independence and opportunity, but they also faced lower wages, long hours, and limited rights. Their presence in the workforce helped fuel early movements for women's rights, including the push for suffrage. The Industrial Revolution created new social roles and expectations, challenging traditional structures and sparking debates that would influence future generations. Immigration played an essential role in sustaining industrial growth. Waves of newcomers from Europe, Asia, and other regions arrived in American ports, seeking opportunity and escape from hardship. They became the backbone of the industrial workforce, contributing labor, skills, and cultural diversity to the rapidly growing cities. Yet, rising immigration also fueled social tensions, as nativist groups expressed fear of economic competition and cultural change. Debates over immigration policy, assimilation, and national identity intensified, reflecting anxieties about the pace and direction of change. The Second Industrial Revolution was not simply a period of economic expansion, it was a complete transformation of American life. Workplaces, homes, streets, and institutions all changed as the rhythms of industrial modernity took hold. The nation became faster, more interconnected, and increasingly reliant on technology. Innovation and industry shaped how Americans lived, worked, traveled, and communicated. The sense of living in a new age, defined by progress and possibility, captivated the imagination of millions, even as others struggled with the disruptions brought by industrialization. These sweeping changes created a momentum that carried the United States toward a new century with confidence, ambition, and purpose. The foundations of modern America, its cities, industries, technologies, and economic systems, were laid during these transformative decades. As the Second Industrial Revolution reached its peak, The country stood poised to enter the 20th century as a rising industrial power, ready to shape the global future with the energy and dynamism forged in its factories, laboratories, and boardrooms. Factories roared through the heart of American cities, pulling millions into dense urban landscapes that barely existed a generation earlier. Streets filled with noise, smoke, and opportunity, reshaping how people lived, worked, and imagined their futures. The old rural rhythms collapsed under the weight of industrial schedules. Everything accelerated, everything intensified. The Second Industrial Revolution wasn't just an economic transformation, it rewired daily life. Immigrants arrived in vast waves from Europe and Asia, carrying dreams of stability and running straight into the brutal reality of overcrowded tenements, unregulated factories, and diseases that spread faster than city authorities could respond. Yet even in misery, hope survived. People stayed because the possibility of economic mobility existed in a way their home countries couldn't offer. Cities like New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh, and Detroit ballooned into industrial monsters powering the nation. Urban architecture leaped upward. Steel allowed skyscrapers to break the limits of height. Elevators made vertical living normal. The skyline turned into a physical representation of ambition and engineering confidence. What had once been low-rise commercial centers transformed into towering hubs of business and finance. Transportation networks shaped how cities functioned. Electric streetcars opened new neighborhoods. Bridges and tunnels connected boroughs. Rail expanded suburbia. Americans could now work in one part of a city and live several miles away. The concept of daily commuting became a structuring force in urban planning and family life. Industrial work environments were harsh. 12-hour days weren't uncommon. Safety regulations barely existed. Child labor remained widespread. Productivity was everything, and human bodies were treated as fuel. Workers responded with growing resentment, leading to walkouts, strikes, unionization campaigns, and confrontations that sometimes descended into violence. Major events like the Haymarket Affair, Pullman Strike, and Homestead Strike exposed deep fractures between labor and capital. Unions gained momentum because the working class realized they had leverage in numbers. Collective action became a tool for survival. Through persistent pressure, workers gradually secured shorter hours, better pay, and improved safety. The labor movement didn't win every battle, but it permanently changed the social contract inside American industry. While urban workers struggled, corporate titans amassed fortunes unimaginable to earlier generations. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, and Morgan became symbols of power, innovation, and excess. Their companies controlled oil, steel, rail, finance, and key infrastructure. This massive concentration of wealth led to the Gilded Age, glittering luxury on the surface, severe inequality underneath. Debates about fairness erupted. Should monopolies be allowed to dominate markets? Should government intervene? That tension shaped American politics, inspiring reforms like the Sherman Antitrust Act and later the Progressive Movement. Public pressure pushed leaders to confront corporate abuses and prioritize consumer safety, labor rights, and economic balance. Education expanded as industrial society required skilled workers. Public schools grew rapidly. Colleges specializing in engineering, science, and business multiplied. Knowledge became tied directly to economic opportunity. Libraries and scientific institutions appeared in major cities, often funded by wealthy industrialists seeking to improve their legacies. Science and technology permeated everyday life. Electricity illuminated homes and factories. Telephones connected families and businesses. Typewriters and adding machines modernized offices. Innovations didn't just improve efficiency, they altered human relationships, communication, and expectations. Americans began living in a world where distance mattered less and speed mattered more. Consumer culture emerged alongside mass production. Standardized products flooded markets. Advertising evolved into a major industry, shaping desires and identities. Department stores offered goods previously accessible only to elites, making shopping a social experience. A new middle class formed, tying personal success to purchasing power and lifestyle. Amid the progress, social problems deepened. Pollution choked urban neighborhoods, rivers turned toxic, housing shortages left thousands in unsafe dwellings. Crime increased, fire hazards were constant. The industrial city became a paradox, a center of opportunity and a breeding ground for hardship. Reformers responded with settlements, social programs, public health initiatives, and housing advocacy. These grassroots efforts pushed America toward modern welfare policies. Culture shifted as well. Newspapers expanded with sensational reporting. Photography documented labor abuses and slum conditions, forcing the nation to confront realities it could no longer ignore. Art and literature grappled with themes of inequality, mechanization, and urban change. American identity stretched, strained, and reshaped itself under the weight of modernization. The Second Industrial Revolution also transformed family dynamics. With more people working in factories, traditional home-based labor patterns dissolved. Women entered industrial employment in significant numbers, challenging social expectations about gender roles. Children often had no choice but to work to support households. These changes provoked national debates about education, parenting, and the moral consequences of industrial capitalism. Religion adapted too. Churches created community centers, youth programs, and charities to support struggling urban families. Faith became a stabilizing force for many immigrants trying to find belonging in crowded, chaotic cities. Cities became laboratories of innovation, hardship, and reinvention. The industrial boom created wealth that financed infrastructure, arts, philanthropy, and scientific advancement. But it also exposed the fragility of human systems when pushed by relentless economic pressure. By the early 20th century, Americans lived in a world utterly transformed. Work rhythms were mechanized. Cities dominated national culture. Technology penetrated every corner of life. Inequality, reform, innovation, conflict, ambition, and hope coexisted in a single sweeping narrative. The United States emerged from this era not just as an industrial giant, but as a society fundamentally reshaped by the power of new technologies and the struggles of millions who built the modern world through sweat, persistence, and sacrifice.